This is Dan Schneider. We're going to do another episode of American Television with Mitchell Hadley. Mitchell Hadley is to my left. So, Mitch, if you could give a little précis on who you are, and then we'll get into our next topic.
Sure, I am a classic TV historian. I write at the website itsabouttv.com. I've written there now for 16 years. I've got two books about TV, the most recent of which is Darkness in Prime Time, that looks at how classic era TV foresaw our modern society today. And I've also written three novels, the third of which is called the Book of Revelations, and it's coming out in June.
So, when we were plotting to do another couple of shows on this forgotten remembered trope, Mitch had suggested two or three people, and we settled on Danny Thomas. And I wanted to do someone very different from both Thomas and the prior person we had done, Gary Moore. And this is basically a child/teen actor that, when I say the name Lance Kerwin, probably 95% of you are going to blank out and say, what? I never heard of that. And which is precisely why I wanted to do the show. Before we get into any biographical stuff with Mitch doing his usual stuff, I just wanted to say I sometimes stumble upon things online here or there. Maybe I'm looking up stuff to write in a story or a play that I'm going to write or whatnot. But sometimes things just pop up, and one of them that popped up was the television show, or a YouTube link to an episode of the television show James at 15 / James at 16, and it starred Lance Kerwin. And I remembered that it was very different from other 1970s shows. It was, in a sense, really ahead of the time. Number one, yes, it focused on young people, but most of the characters and the actors there were in their teens, as was Kerwin, who's just a year older than the character he played. And when I think of, for example, the Brady Bunch actors from the 70s, when I think of actors from other shows like The Partridge Family, or comedies that were on at the time, like Different Strokes, this was a far more realistic show, and I think it was a precursor of shows like, in the 1980s, the Degrassi kids shows from Canada. It was a precursor of something like the Claire Danes show in the early 90s, My So-Called Life, and other things that treated young people as actual beings and not just punchlines and not just props. Kerwin was, I think, a magnificent actor for his age. I think he eventually suffered from what a lot of kid actors do, and that is he became less cute. He had personal issues, and his career, he basically pissed most of it away. But in seeing and watching probably 4 or 5 out of the 20 episodes fully, and then dipping in and out of some of the other episodes, there are some just remarkable scenes that show how good an actor he was. I put him on par, the young Kerwin, with someone like, just to go with a Canadian actress, Megan Follows, who I've always thought is one of the best actresses of my generation, which would be also Kerwin's generation. He's probably the same age as you, Mitch. So with that little preamble of mine, maybe you could have an opening volley, and then we can talk about his life and brief career.
Yeah, Lance Kerwin was born just 6 months after I was, so it always have the disconcerting experience of somebody who's your age who's no longer living, and it reminds us of our own mortality. But I think, this was a brilliant suggestion of yours to do him for a couple of reasons, because you can't really underestimate how big a star he was, relatively speaking, at the time, and how groundbreaking and controversial James at 15 was at the time. If you look back on it from today's perspective, I think you have this kind of, what's the big fuss? type of idea, because as you've said, we have become used to more realistic portrayals of younger people and their lives, and we become a little more used to really skilled young actors who aren't just playing caricatures or who aren't just regurgitating memorized lines, which we've gotten so accustomed to. But this wasn't the case with Kerwin. He was a gifted young man, a natural actor, maybe. He came from an acting background. And when we were talking about Danny Thomas earlier and talking about how he had come up through the very tough ranks, it was a long stretch for him to get to become a star. Kerwin made an incredibly quick transition to being a skilled actor who was headlining his own series. He'd only been acting for a short period of time, relatively speaking, when he did James at 15. And this was not a case of someone like, I'll throw out Bobby Sherman, for example, who was older, who had more experience, who was a recording star. Those are the kinds of people up to that point that you thought of as being the teen idols. You either had somebody like Annette from the Mickey Mouse Club,
Yeah.
or you had people like the Monkees or the pop stars. But here you had somebody who was not only an idol of teens, but who was a teen himself. And he was not playing glamorous roles. He was playing these tough, gritty, everyman or every teen, if you will, type of roles that kids could really identify, whether he was acting about a boy having to deal with bedwetting, a very sensitive topic, and a parent who was really not doing it. He was having trouble with his mother and how she was raising him. Or on the flip side, with James at 15, seeing a kid dealing with adolescence, eventually losing his virginity, things that kids could identify with at that age, and that he didn't look stupid playing the role because he was of an age. He wasn't demeaning in the way that he played it because he could have been you or me, and he was a very good actor doing it. So it's quite, at that point in time, he represents something that is quite remarkable within television and with entertainment, and it is no reason to wonder why he became a star, why he was able to really reach out and grab the audience at that point in time. It makes his subsequent inability, I don't want to necessarily call it failure, inability to transition to a more adult career. Well, geez, that doesn't make him unusual. But considering the kind of talent he had, it is too bad that he was not able to go on and to become a fine young man actor and to mature into older roles as precious few actors have actually been able to do.
About the only equivalent I can think of to Kerwin in that era, and I mentioned acting-wise, I compare him to Megan Follows, but she was a bit younger. She's about 7 or 8 years younger, and so she didn't really hit the big time, if you will, until the mid-'80s. But to me, the clear contemporary, the yin to his yang, is Christy McNichol on Family. Christy McNichol was, again, about the same age, maybe a year younger than him, a year or two. And she was also much lauded, and not only just lauded critically, but she won a lot of awards. I don't think Kerwin ever got an Emmy award for his portrayals.
I think so, no.
But she too seemed to be one of those people that she had a bit more success in her adult life. She had a second show with Richard Mulligan and Dinah Manoff in a pure comedy show. But it seems to me that Kerwin though, because he was male, was probably a bigger star. And of all of those people on the Tiger Beat magazines, the Teen Beat magazines that my sister would have read, he's probably the only one that either was not in just frivolous entertainment, in the sense that he wasn't, like you mentioned, Bobby Sherman. He wasn't Davy Jones. He wasn't what's his name, David Cassidy. Nor was he, the kid that was just there for the punchline. It's almost as if his career was a bunch of after school specials, dealing with this problem, that problem, this social issue. It's almost as if he was born to play characters in that era who were dealing with things that few people in real life wanted to talk about, and certainly on television, that was his métier that propelled him. But in a sense, I guess maybe you can only do that, so many of those kinds of roles, until you get boxed in.
Yeah, well, it kind of reminds me in a way of James Dean, as you were talking about that. Kerwin could have been a rebel without a cause type of actor in the sense of channeling that young angst and seeing what he could do with it. Now, the comparison with Dean is simply that James Dean only acted in 3 movies, and he was nominated for Best Actor twice. The only reason he didn't get 3 nominations is probably because 2 of the movies came out in the same year. So he had a phenomenal, but phenomenally short career, and we don't know how a 35, 40, 45-year-old James Dean would have done. He did a lot of television work, as so many people did. We don't know what he would have done if he had grown older. And so it's the same kind of thing with Lance Kerwin. He was not able to transition into the older roles, but he had this great ability as a young actor to be able to channel that kind of feeling, and I think that that's key to his career at that point in his life.
So I just want to talk about 3 or 4 episodes briefly from that I had watched, because while I think James Dean, in terms of a brief career, tragic end, is somewhat apropos to Kerwin. Dean was from the Marlon Brando, the method acting thing, the brooding, there's that scene. There's that scene with Jim Backus where he's just, all he needed to do was shout Stella, Stella. But Kerwin, on the other hand, comes from the 1970s more realist acting thing, and for a young person to be able to master that is, if you watch him in some of the James of 15 episodes, even when you watch him in something as over the top as Salem's Lot, which is probably the thing that he's most noted for, and certainly Stephen King fans will know him for that. Even in something as over the top as that, there are moments where you can see the slightest quiver of his face. There's one scene in Salem's Lot where one of his friends, who's been vampirized, I guess you would call it, is floating outside a window and is begging to come in. And his character is there, both sad that he knows his friend is dead and this isn't really his friend, but he doesn't want to let on. He opens the window, the friend sort of comes in wanting to vampirize Kerwin's character, and then he pulls out a crucifix. And it's not that it's the greatest acting scene ever done, but for a then 18 or 19-year-old in a silly kind of fantasy, if we will, horror fantasy, to bring that much depth and emotion in a scene that we've seen play out 1,000 times in vampire movies, with the vampire trying to seduce the would-be victim. It's something that that when I watch it, I'm like, boy, this is good acting. Now, of the 3 or 4 episodes, the first one is the pilot, which was a 90-minute episode, and there's some scenes that he has, because in this sets up the 20-episode series where he's living in Oregon. He's not one of the big boys on campus, but he's a popular kid. His family, his dad gets a job off in Boston. They have to go cross country. His life is being turned upside down. Melissa Sue Anderson, the ubiquitous blonde of the 70s, is the girl that he likes. He has to leave her behind. But he then rebels. He runs away from his family, and he meets up with, of all people, Kate Jackson, probably on vacation from solving Charlie's Angels crimes. And what's interesting there too is we see scenes with this child interacting with an adult character. He clearly has a crush on the older Jackson character, but the way that it's written isn't just easily dismissed. The character played by Jackson treats him as a near peer, and and Kerwin's acting. He isn't a bawling mess. He isn't stupid enough to know that he really has a shot with her, and you find in these things, The Boy Who Drank Too Much and some of these other things too, is all of his work is sort of stippled with all of these kinds of little scenes that probably, if you got another 100 actors his own age, you'd be lucky if you found one who could do half of them half as good as he does. Another episode that came to mind is the one, let's see, Kathy's in the shower. So he has an older sister in the show, and the older sister is dating her professor, and his family's his parents don't approve of it, and the whole show is centered upon the tension between the daughter, the professor boyfriend, and the family members, but yet it's seen through the eyes mostly of James, and and James has the wherewithal emotionally to understand his sister's situation and be more open to it than the parents are, which is a remarkable thing. Father Knows Best. What was the name of the old TV show, and this went on through all of these sitcoms, up through Robert Reed and in the Brady Bunch and whatnot. But here you have a young character that is preternaturally, in a sense, able to understand other people, and it shows what empathy the character has. I'll just do one more, and then we can bat it about. There was. Where is it? Looking at the girl with the bad rep, Friends. I can't find it, but there is. The apple tree, the singing, and the gold. So James is visited by one of his friends from Oregon, a guy who's a big dope. He's like a big, strong kid, much stronger than James, and a dope. He comes to visit, and it turns out that he's got a terminal illness. And again, this dips into the idea of Kerwin excelling in these, ABC after-school special kind of, disease of the week kind of things. But it's again done in a way that's, I think, well above those shows, as well-meaning as they may have been, in that we don't get a lot of, we get the weepiness of the characters within the situation, but they are not trying to make us weep for the character, because the guy himself is still a bit of a dope. We get to understand that he's not as big a boor as he seems to be in the beginning, but we still recognize that he's not in James's league as an adult child, as someone able to see as far as James can. And then in the end, when we find out James gets a letter that his friend has died, the mother of the kid writes him to James, we don't have a big weeping scene. We just see James reading the letter and looking out into the harbor of Boston. Now, my recounting these 3 or 4 episodes doesn't do justice to the acting, because you'd have to watch them. And you can just Google up the James at 15, James at 16 episodes, and you can watch all 20 online. This is one of the things that's great about the era that we do live in. But when I see that again, it's just remarkable. And the funny thing is, it seemed to be almost a precursor of his own life, because his later life plays out like an adult version of one of these after-school specials where people who can't, they drink too much, they do too much drugs, blah, 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 blah. if you have any comments, or I know that I sent you some of the links that we
Mhm.
went in and out. What do you think of Kerwin's acting?
Well, it's interesting just that in mentioning the different situations he finds himself in, the theme song at the beginning of each episode has a line in it about poor James, and I think that kind of um, sums sums it up that he's always in a situation where he's as you pointed out in the episode with his sister, he's kind of observing things. He's in the context and he's outside of it at the same time, but he's running into these situations that don't seem to be so far-fetched that his peers in the audience aren't going to recognize this. And I think when you talk about his skill at being able to play these roles, this is a really good seg into looking at how Kerwin got into acting, because his father was an actor and he was an acting coach. And so I think that this is, to me at least, it's a crucial distinction in that he's not only dealing with a parent who has a career of his own, who might be able to make the right introductions or might infuse his son with a love of acting, but also somebody who knows a little bit about how to act. So I think that when we find out that Kerwin started as early as he did, it isn't a surprise that he was good at it, perhaps considering that he came from a background of somebody who taught acting. When we look at his entry into auditions, and it mentions somewhere that he started auditioning when he was 13 or 14, early teens. And in a way, that's quite young, yes, to be auditioning for even significant roles, if not starring roles, when you're still in your early teens. On one, in one sense, that is quite extraordinary, that because you're that young. But in another sense, there are a lot of child actors who got their start much younger than that, when they were still 7, 8, 9 years old, and they were playing the prototypical child roles on sitcoms. So the fact that he didn't get into acting, auditioning until he was around 13 or 14 is really kind of suggests a couple of things. Number one, that he had a real talent for acting. It was a natural fit for the roles in which he was being cast. But also, it suggests to me that he didn't just jump into it without having had some training, some upbringing in doing it right in the first place. So I think that's what made him, in a sense, if not a plug and play type of actor, it at least meant that he came into auditioning for roles in his early teens well equipped to succeed, I think. And his acting style certainly plays off of that as well.
Yeah, and I think it suggests he didn't have little league parents who were forcing him to become an actor at 4. That he by the time you're a preteen, you're in junior high school, so you've got a decade of experience there, and I think that shows in his acting too. I want to compare him to another actor who's a near contemporary of his. But before I do it, I just have to read off some of the titles of these TV shows that or TV episodes they was in, because it shows just how good he was at these movie of the week or disease of the week kind of thing. So we go here. He did Little House on the Prairie. He did Emergency. He did Cannon. So he's doing the run of the mill stuff there. Then he does The Greatest Gift, which was set in the Old West. He does Reflection of the Murders. Then he does ABC After School specials. He does 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 specials. It looks like for the ABC After School specials. The Family Holvac. This is another frontier Little House kind of thing. He does The Loneliest Runner, which was a Michael Landon thing. He does The Death of Richie. I mean, just the titles give you the idea. Young Joe, the Forgotten Kennedy. You know about. I mean, he does. He does After Salem's Lot. Well, he does an episode of Family with Christy McNichol. Once Upon a Midnight Sky, The Boy Who Drank Too Much, Children of Divorce, Advice to the Lovelorn, CBS School Break Special. He does one of them. The Mysterious Stranger, Trapper John, A Killer in the Family, which I'm going to get back to in a moment. Fairy Tale Theater, he does. And I guess Enemy Mine is probably the most interesting film he does there, a sci-fi film from the 80s. But boy, that really says a lot. But the one I wanted to talk about was the movie A Killer in a Family, because in it, it's a Robert Mitchum TV vehicle. It has James Spader in it, of all people. And to me, James Spader is the yin to Kerwin's yang. I think Spader is a couple of years older than him. I think he played Kerwin's brother in this telefilm in the Mitchum film. And Spader seems to have done just about everything right. If you look in his career, Spader makes interesting choices. Spader seamlessly transitioned from the troubled teen roles when he started. He becomes a wise-ass character. He goes from television show to television show. He's done little independent films here and there when he wanted to. He can basically... he's one of those rare actors that who isn't at the Keanu Reeves level or the Cruise level in getting 20 million or 50 million a picture now. But because of his ability and his recognized excellence in whatever he does, if James Spader shows an interest, hire him. And I think Kerwin could have been that. And it's interesting to compare that they did that role together as brothers. But just about everything that could go wrong for Kerwin, whether it's his own fault or not, goes wrong. Whereas, as the old saying goes, James Spader seemed to step in shit and had good luck the rest of his life.
Yeah, I think, Kerwin came along at a really a propitious time for him in that at that time you were starting to see the transition into a more naturalistic style of acting for young people, young roles. You were getting into relevance on TV and in the movies to an increasing extent, the after school special type of thing. And you had casting directors who were really looking for somebody who could nail that kind of a role. And that's what he did well. And he came along at the right time. If he had had this kind of talent, maybe 10 years before, they wouldn't have been looking for that kind of an actor. Yeah. 10 years later, and there would have been a lot of actors doing that kind of thing. But he really came along at the right time. And perhaps that's part of his problem. He rises very quickly. And, within a couple of years, he's starring. He comes off of the Michael Landon movie that we talked about a little bit earlier, and all of a sudden James at 15, and he's 15, and he's the star in that, and he's very credible. He's doing the TV movies, he's doing the TV specials. So we've talked about how good he is in roles like that, but there's a downside to that, and I think you've also touched on it in time when you ran through all those different kinds of roles. There are variations on a theme, and pretty soon that's what he's identified in, whereas Spader doesn't quite fall into that. He's got a very eclectic type of acting style and acting ability that serves him well in many different kinds of things. But what Kerwin did not have was the ability to progress beyond that thoughtful, sensitive teen type of role. So when he matures out of that, there is not a natural next step for him to go to. There isn't a kind of evolution to playing older characters that you might see with other actors. And I think that really did hurt him. in a way, he was typecast not just because of the role that he played, but because of the age that he was. It was difficult to envision him as an older actor playing different kinds of roles from what he had done at that age.
Yeah, and also the fact that Spader is, I guess, about 5'10", 5'11", maybe 6 foot. Spader has that kind of twinkle in the eye that he can play a bad guy, he can play a pervy kind of guy, but a fascinating pervert, a fascinating bad guy. Kerwin did not seem to have he had those puppy dog eyes. He had the long hair. There was also I don't mean it in a negative sense, but there was also a feminine quality about him in his eyes. Beta male thing that you don't have with someone like a Spader, and he probably could have adjusted had the Hollywood television and film constructs been a bit more amenable to giving people shots. But like I said, the only thing he was getting was after school specials or things that had that after school special kind of quality. And he was wonderful at playing empathetic, more intelligent than average characters, but it didn't seem that he could be anything more than that at the time, or Hollywood wouldn't allow it.
Yeah, well, somebody had a really nice description for this. They described him as belonging to the pain as fuel category of acting, which is channeling all of those painful memories and allowing them to fuel what your character does. And so he is very good at that. These subtle, serious roles, these sensitive, understanding roles. But, it's kind of the same vicious circle that you see a lot when you have actors who become typecast in a particular way. The casting directors are saying, in essence, show me that you can do something else. But also at the same time, they're not willing to cast you in the roles to give you an opportunity that you can show that you can do something else. So you used yin and yang before. It's kind of this same vicious circle type of thing. You can't get the experience because he doesn't have the experience. But the only way to get the experience is to act in the roles he can't get because he doesn't have the experience.
So, of the three people that we've profiled in this sort of forgotten, remembered series that we're going to be doing, we talked first of Gary Moore, and Moore seemed to bristle against the way he was sort of boxed in, but this was a 55, 60-year-old man bristling. He knew how to deal with it. He eventually was mature enough, and he was like, well, I guess, I made my mark, I made my money, and he accepted the role that his lot in the business. We just talked about Danny Thomas before this show, and Danny Thomas seemed to have no problems charting his graceful exit, if you will, from Hollywood on his own terms. Here with Kerwin, because he was in a sense sort of like the Dick Clark thing, the eternal teenager in most of Hollywood's eyes. He tends to fall down that rabbit hole that, you can talk about the Leave It to Beaver boys. You can talk about Dana Plato. You can talk about, well, not only Dana Plato, but Gary Coleman from Different Strokes. All of these Hollywood young actors that once they are no longer cute, once they are no longer precocious, once they are no longer special, or the only one specializing in whatever little niche they've held for a couple of years, his life seems to fall apart because just looking at this, and again, this is from Wikipedia, but it's well documented elsewhere. He seems to have disappeared in the mid '80s, in his mid 20s, for about 20 plus years. He has alcohol and drug problems, and he ends up having to rehabilitate himself. He gets married, has a bunch of kids. He ends up as like a pastor at some church in, of all places, Hawaii, and then I guess he tries one film which is produced about the history of Hawaii, where he's living in, called The Wind and the Reckoning in 2022. He does a small role in that, and then boom, early January 2023, he dies, and it's reported that it was ischemic heart disease, and this is and other thing, atherosclerotic coronary artery disease. So probably all of his years of abusing his body caught
Certainly
up
didn't
with him.
help. Yeah.
It's just for me sad that for someone who had at the time a very unique set of capabilities to offer Hollywood. I mean, if I had been a producer and whatnot, I'd love to have had a young kid like him working for me either on a television show or in films. But his life almost just evolved down to the worst aspects of what he was constantly portraying as a kid. This sort of after school special dismal end.
Well, the interesting thing about it is that we do get kind of a of a tantalizing look at what his career could have been with the comeback that he does make, which is not a major comeback, but he does rebuild his career to a certain extent near the end of his life. You mentioned that he does start to take on some smaller roles, and what you can see, I think, is that he's in the process of reinventing himself as a character actor.
Yeah.
And just because he has faded from the public eye for so long, he's still known. People still have fond memories of him. He's not forgotten how to act. You don't forget that kind of thing. And he is still very much a professional, and he is appreciated by the people he works at. And he starts to build through these small character roles that play to his strengths. And he still has a name that people remember fondly. So I think it's too bad that he, for that variety of reasons that you go into, that his life is cut short relatively soon. And because I think that he was on the way, should he have desired it, to having been able to have a reasonable second act as a character actor, as a working actor, to complement his work as a youth minister and the other things that he was doing. Now, whether he would have wanted to pursue that, I don't know. But he certainly had the ability to be able to do it. And so, he does kind of fall into that space between the Gary Moore who is unhappy and the Danny Thomas who transitions into something else. Kerwin transitions after his very, very rough period with addictions. He transitions into family, youth ministry, helping other people, some of that, same kind of philanthropic thing, while at the same time having this bit of a go at being a character actor and reminding people that he hadn't lost the ability to act, and he was finding a way to be able to put it into very different roles that still suited his strengths. So he kind of falls right in between there. But I think, to answer a broader question, the misfortune that we have is that because of what had happened to him, and because his peak acting career was relatively short, we don't remember how good he was at the time, and we don't have a huge body of work from outside of that very central period when we got to see him exhibit that talent.
As you were speaking there a minute or two ago, a couple of names flash into my head, or images of other two young male actors in his vein and in his generation. And so I just was Googling them up. And I want to throw this out and see if you remember these names, because they, to me, would be what Kerwin could have been. Although I think Kerwin was a better actor than either of them and could have gone farther, but they've had success throughout their careers where he didn't. The first one, do you remember an actor named Chris Makepeace?
Yes, I do.
Yes, he was in Meatballs. He was in My Bodyguard, which is a wonderful film from the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
and a number of other things. And he looks like he hasn't acted since the turn of the century, and he's been doing assistant director roles and whatnot. So he's still in the business. He's not a big name or whatnot, but he was a good actor. I think he was a very good actor. I don't think he was quite as good as Kerwin at their peaks, but he did obviously had a much better ability to transition to a post acting life. Before I get to the second guy, does if you look at these two actors who are only just a few years born apart, do you see any connection between them, or the differences? Or
Well, I guess one of the differences I would see right away is that Makepeace was able to transition into the behind the scenes type of work, which suggests, again, without knowing more about either actor, what it does suggest is that if you come up into the business and start to get involved in the technical aspects of it, whether it is, the production end, as Thomas did, or the directing and writing the type of work that Makepeace gets into, I think you certainly increase your chances of being able to have a successful transition if you are in the business but not strictly as an actor. Well, I think somebody like Ron Howard is a perfect example of that, because we will come to a time when people do not remember Ron Howard as anything other than a big time director of big movies, and yet he had quite a good acting career, right up in through Happy Days, where he made a transition from being the pure child actor as he was in The Music Man and Andy Griffith, to a young man actor as he was in Happy Days, to a very successful director in television and movies, to success to the point that people forget that acting. So I think it really does help if you have that understanding and experience and desire to want to remain in the business, which apparently Howard had from a very early age. I just finished writing him up in one of my TV guide reviews, where you're looking at him in 1965 and 6 as a child actor, and already then he's starting to take an interest in the back end of things. And so it's no surprise that he would wind up being able to make a go of it. And we haven't seen anything from what we've talked about with Kerwin's career that would suggest that he had that desire to remain that he could have used those talents and transitioned into a life outside of acting, but still within the business.
now I want to give a second actor that I think is even a better comparison to Kerwin, and who is actually, Makepeace was 4 years younger than Kerwin. This actor is just a year younger than Kerwin, but he had a very similar arc in the 1970s, and that actor is what's his name? Jackie Earl Haley.
Oh yeah.
And if you remember him from the Bad News Bears, he was
Yep.
in 1979, the same year Chris Makepeace had My Bodyguard. He was in the Breaking Away, the biking film about, and that was another very underrated but excellent film. And then he did a few B films. He's got a good 70s career. In the 80s, he does just a couple of movies. The 90s, he does a couple of movies. From 1992 to 2006, he's not in front of the camera. I don't know what he did, if anything. Then he has a career resurgence, including being in The Watchmen, the comic book adaptation of that. And he's doing, it looks like, a lot of, kind of fantasy films and horror films and whatnot. But he played the sensitive and sometimes troubled teen in the 70s and early 80s, very similar to what Kerwin had done. And yet, he goes in the 80s and 90s, his career just collapses, just like Kerwin's. But he sticks it out for whatever reason, and he has a career renaissance. Maybe not Oscar-winning heights, but he's probably a working actor who's making a good, solid living now. Any thoughts about the comp to Jackie Earl Haley?
what it really comes down to, I think, is avoiding the pitfalls of fame. Oh boy, that sounds bad. That sounds like something you'd read in a fortune cookie. But it's true that if you look at the actors who come up as young actors, not necessarily child actors, because I don't, in some ways I don't consider a 15-year-old a child actor. He's a teen actor. He's moving into the young adult roles. But if you look at the ones who have been able to succeed and who have had long careers or who have at least managed to stay relevant and, unlike Jackie Earle Haley, come back to a certain extent, um, they tend to fall into a category of either avoiding the kind of drug and alcohol problems that have claimed so many, and that claim them at ages much younger than Lance Kerwin's, or that you see them being able to come back in various capacities, either as an actor or a character actor, or in the industry side of things, or as a writer or director. And I guess that's kind of it. Is that somebody once said that the secret to success in being a writer in Hollywood is that you've got to be able to come in, you've got to make the pitch. And if your pitch is all the way around a barking dog, and they tell us barking dogs aren't in nowadays, you'd better have something else in line. If you're not going to have the barking dog, you'd better have, the flying dragon or what have you. But you got to have something to back it up. And maybe it's as simple as that you've got to avoid the disasters, the personal disasters, and or you've got to be able to have something else to come back with. That if the acting roles dry up, you've got to have some other aspect of the business that you can fall back on, or you have to have something else that you are able to do outside of the industry altogether because of what you might have done in college or what you might have been interested in or something like that.
I don't really have much more to add about Kerwin or an actor other than to tell people to look up Salem's Lot and see some really good acting in an otherwise just standard kind of horror film. Although it's a better than average horror film. Watch James at 15/16 to see, like I said, precursors to a lot of what was to come in the coming decades afterward. But I think with this series, just to turn away in these last couple of minutes of this show, I think we've seen some interesting patterns developing in just the three people that we've done: Gary Moore, Danny Thomas, Lance Kerwin. And we're not going to do these episodes every month or whatnot, but when we do them, and as we get to do a 5, 10, a dozen, 20, whatever we end up doing on this Forgotten Remembered, it'll be interesting to just see the things that cohere about why someone was forgotten, why someone we're trying to remember, why what was once considered memorable. In Danny Thomas's case, he's obviously the most well-known of the trio that we're talking about still today, probably. But even, it reminds me of the old poem by Percy Bysshe Shelley, Ozymandias, or I King of Kings, and the statue fallen by there. But I think looking at some of these things, making some of these comparisons, whether I'm comparing someone like Kerwin to several male actors in his generation, or whether we're talking about Danny Thomas and Kerwin eventually getting his life together and both trying to bring help to people or whatnot, or whether we're talking about the connections between Gary Moore feeling boxed in and Kerwin obviously being boxed in as an actor. It'll be interesting to see these little recurrences here and there again in whomever we're talking about, because when we do profile the Mary Tyler Moores and the Lucille Balls and the big successes, it's not really even. I mean, you can see things that are similar to, but I think it's more interesting to see why someone didn't, because certainly the Danny Thomas's his talent got him where he was. Same thing with Moore. Kerwin didn't go as far as either of those two, and it'll just be interesting to see how it develops as we go on.
Well, as you were talking about that, it reminded me of a saying that history may not repeat itself, but it rhymes.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's going to happen. We're going to see that no two careers of the people that we talk about in this series, no two careers are identical, but we're going to see rhymes that come up, and they're not all going to share the same rhymes, but all the rhymes are going to appear in different ways with different people, and between all the people that we wind up doing, none of them will share all the same rhymes, but all the rhymes are going to wind up being recited one way or the other.
Well, on that note, we will end this show. We'll be back next month. Don't know what we'll be talking about. We'll kick it around
It'll
between
be good,
us.
though.
Yeah, it will be good. So thank you for watching.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Thank you, everybody.